Now, while Halloween is thematically associated with fear and horror, in practice it's quite a jovial occasion. In the countries where it's celebrated, everyone gets into costumes, there are parties all around, and, for one night, all of the terrors from fiction stop being a source of fear. Nevertheless, it's also a time when, ironically, people's anxieties come exclusively from reality. We've all heard about how supposedly crime rates and cult activities spike on the 31st of October, but beyond that, cases like the brutal murder of Martha Moxley or the one of Lisa Ann French return to our collective thoughts, without mentioning the number of violent crimes that remain unsolved to this day. But there is no case that's more atrocious to me than the one I'm gonna tell you about today. One that's not especially violent or graphic, but completely horrendous for other reasons that you'll soon find out. This is the case of the man who killed Halloween, one that forever changed how the festivity is perceived. On the night of October 31, 1974, in Pasadena, Texas, Ronald O'Brien and Jim Bates went trick-or-treating with their children around the neighborhood. They had just finished dinner with friends and neighbors. Ronald was still dressed in the lab coat he wore at the opticians where he worked. At that time, it wasn't uncommon for children to go trick-or-treating on their own, as long as they didn't leave their neighborhood. But that night, it was raining, and there weren't many people on the streets. So the parents decided to accompany their children so they could enjoy Halloween at least a little. The group consisted of Ronald, Jim, and 4 children: Timothy and Elizabeth O'Brien, Ronald's children, and Bates' 2 children. The group visited a couple of houses where the children received candy. The kids were growing impatient since the rain prevented them from going very far or visiting many houses. The night passed uneventfully until they arrived at a particular house. This house had its lights off and its occupants appeared to be absent. The boys insisted on knocking on the door, but after a few minutes with no response, they gave up and decided to go to the next home. As they were leaving the house, Ronald, who was following the group from behind, reported seeing an arm extend from the half-open door, gesturing him to come over. Ronald quickly checked on the group to make sure they hadn't wandered too far and approached the door. The resident gave Ronald 5 pixie sticks, a bittersweet powdered candy usually packaged in a wrapper resembling a straw. Ronald distributed the candy, giving 1 to each boy and the 5th to a young man named Whitney Parker, whom he recognized from the church where he served as a deacon. After a while, they decided to call it a night. The boys said goodbye to their neighbors and went home. Timothy, Ronald's 8-year-old son, asked his parents if he could have some of his candy before bed, and they said yes. Ronald handed the pixie sticks to his son, who struggled to get the powder out of the packaging. Ronald helped him loosen it, and the boy immediately ate it. You can probably guess where this story is going, but I promise it's even worse. Timothy said the candy tasted bitter and drank some Kool-Aid to get rid of the bad taste. Shortly after, the young man began vomiting and convulsing in the bathroom. His father stayed with him and yelled for his wife to call an ambulance. The wife did just that and also contacted the local authorities, suspecting that someone had poisoned the candy and fearing for the other children in the neighborhood. Once the ambulance arrived, Ronald rushed towards it with his unconscious son in his arms, while Detective Bill Lanier of the Pasadena Police Department was speeding towards the hospital. Unfortunately, when he arrived, Timothy had been declared DOA at the age of 8 due to cyanide poisoning. Immediately upon hearing this, Detective Lanier instructed the other officers to alert the neighborhood and retrieve, at all costs, the other 4 pixie sticks that had been given to the boys. He arranged for them to be analyzed in a laboratory as soon as they were in the possession of the Pasadena Police Department. The first candy recovered was that of Timothy's 5-year-old sister, Elizabeth, who had gone to bed and fortunately hadn't touched the candy. Then came the 2 from Jim Bates' children, who were also sleeping and hadn't touched the pixie sticks. That's 4 including Timothy's. We're missing 1. All of this was happening in the middle of the night. Imagine the situation. You go to bed after your children come home from trick-or-treating, and a few hours later, police officers wake you up telling you that someone had poisoned the candy and your neighbor's son had just died. While they hadn't informed the entire area yet, Panic had already begun to spread throughout the neighborhood. Parents searching every corner of their house all night for any trace of candy, shouting to warn the other neighbors. It's safe to say that no one in the neighborhood could sleep that night. In the midst of all this, Whitney Parker's parents received the news and turned pale when they saw that their 10-year-old son had taken his candy to his room. With police officers following them, they ran to their son's room in a complete frenzy, and when they opened the door, they almost fainted. The boy was unconscious, with the pixie sticks in his hand, half open. Luckily, one of the officers approached him and determined that he was just asleep. Apparently, he hadn't been able to open the package and simply fell asleep. I can't imagine the relief Whitney's parents must have felt. Their son had miraculously survived. And speaking of miracles, there is no better word to describe the fact that of the 5 pixie sticks that had been distributed and were now in the possession of the Pasadena Police Department, only 1 had been consumed. But that also makes the death of the boy who unfortunately did eat the candy that much more tragic. The pixie sticks had been opened and the first 5 centimeters of their contents replaced with cyanide, a dose large enough to kill 3 adults, and then resealed with a stapler. The next day, the case became national news, and even reporters from European countries arrived days later to cover it. Families across the country were in a panic, especially those in the suburb where Timothy lived, Deer Park in Harris County. Detective Lanier said one of the police station's rooms was completely filled with piles of candy that residents had given to officers for fear of poisoning. Police departments from everywhere across the country experienced similar situations. If you're not from the US, this may seem a bit excessive. I mean, you can understand Timothy's neighbors. After all, the murder happened where they lived, and for all they knew, their children could have received poisoned candy from the same person. But why was there such a huge reaction on a national scale? Well, for decades, there have been rumors and urban legends that every year on Halloween, certain individuals poison candy, hide razor blades in candy apples, and insert needles in candy wrappers, out of pure cruelty and malice before giving them to children. These stories were common, but there had never been a confirmed case, and Timothy was the first. So suddenly, in the public's eyes, everything they had heard over the years became a real possibility. They were no longer just stories, and every neighbor became a potential murderer in the eyes of every family in the country. This situation was exactly what the killer wanted. He knew that rumors of poisonings always made the rounds on Halloween, and that the crime would be attributed to these anonymous maniacs committing atrocities without reason. Well, let me tell you straight up, this wasn't the case. These urban legends are just that, urban legends. Timothy wasn't murdered by a stranger committing a spontaneous act of cruelty, but by his own father, Ronald O'Brien, who had a very clear motive for his actions. It's like I told you before, you probably already knew where this story was going, but it's even worse. O'Brien was arrested on November 5, 1974 for the murder of his own son and the attempted murder of 4 other children, including his daughter. I have talked about psychopathy before on this channel, and it's a term that, along with sociopathy, I frequently use in my videos. But that aside, I think it's very difficult to separate the concept from serial killers, and that makes sense. All serial killers are either sociopaths or psychopaths, and since no psychopath would ever admit to their own condition, we don't have many points of reference to compare them. I can tell you that they lack empathy, that they seek to harm everyone around them, and that they see the rest of the world the way we would look at a group of ants. But without any concrete examples to show you, it becomes difficult to illustrate exactly how a psychopath's mind works, what goes through their heads when they make decisions, how they think on a daily basis. It's not something easy to imagine. Today, I can finally show you a concrete example. After watching this video, you will fully understand how a true psychopath thinks. O'Brien was a man respected and loved by his community. He He was a member of the church and, more importantly, he had a family. He had a job and no criminal record. He wasn't an intelligent man. In fact, I consider him a moron, but he was functional and capable of holding a conversation. He wasn't violent or addicted to substances. He was just another man from the block. This is how the average psychopath looks to the rest of the world, and that's why they are so dangerous. They are a harmless part of the crowd. A psychopath has an almost non-existent capacity for empathy. They are incapable of feeling love or any meaningful emotion, only very superficial versions of them, with the exception of anger, pleasure, shame, and stress. These four feelings make up a psychopath's life in its entirety. The reason they can fit perfectly into society, despite being completely different from other people, is because, unlike sociopaths, they know how to adapt to their surroundings. Psychopaths can't feel empathy, but they can see it, and they can see how those around them react to stimuli. And it's through observation that they learn which facial expressions correspond to each emotion, which emotion is most appropriate for each situation, and which tone of voice or manner of speaking is most common in their circle. That becomes the blueprint for their act, which is nothing more than a perverse emulation of what empathy looks and sounds like, a parody. The concept doesn't exist in any other way for them, but this act has cracks, ones that become more evident if you look closely, which is why they desperately do everything they can to avoid standing out. O'Brien put together a good act. He got himself a wife and children, joined the church in a Christian community, and regularly interacted with his neighbors. Detective Lanier said he had the presence of a teddy bear, but once they began investigating, they began to see the cracks. It turns out O'Brien was in debt and about to lose his car. On top of that, the optician where he worked discovered he'd been stealing money from the store and was about to fire him. It's unknown how much of this his wife was made aware of. I want you to know that this was O'Brien's motive. He didn't want to feel the embarrassment of losing his car and ruining his reputation in the neighborhood. A normal person solves a problem like this in various ways. But a psychopath is capable of coming to the following conclusion. I have two kids, right? I can take out life insurances on both of them, and collect the money if I kill them and don't get caught. Those are the thoughts that can pop into their heads, and that's what O'Brien thought. When they weighed the lives of their own children and 3 other boys against the possibility of shame and having to work to save money, they considered the second option to be the most important. They believe it's preferable to poison and watch their family die in front of their eyes than to go through that. That's a psychopath. Not someone super manipulative or intelligent or a savage with violent fantasies. No, a person you'd never pay attention to, but who is capable of having these kinds of thoughts completely naturally. The detectives asked him to show them the house where he supposedly got the candy, but he went around in circles and said he didn't remember until he had no choice but to choose a house at random. He chose the residence of a man who was at work at that time, whose alibi was confirmed by 200 people. So his story began to be questioned by the police. However, he insisted with the abandoned house and the arms sticking out the door. Detectives discovered that O'Brien, secretly from his wife, had taken out life insurance policies for each of his children a month earlier, and that the total sum for both was the same amount he owed. Not only that, just hours after Timothy's death, he called the bank to begin the paperwork for collecting the insurance. During the funeral, he sang a song during the service dedicated to his son at his church. Moments later, he told his wife and relatives that they should discuss how to spend the insurance and that he would like to go on a vacation. It was at that moment that his wife learned there was an insurance policy in the first place. Things weren't looking good for O'Brien, so detectives decided to investigate further and discovered he'd been seen at a chemical store asking for cyanide and had contacted an acquaintance who worked with chemicals, asking questions like how long would it take cyanide to kill a person and what would be a fatal dose. This was enough grounds for them to investigate his home, where they found a poorly hidden knife with traces of pixie sticks and a stapler like the one used to seal the poisoned ones. That was checkmate. O'Brien was sentenced to death by lethal injection in June 1975 and executed in March 1984. He maintained his innocence until the end, a tactic that had worked to stall his sentence for years, but ultimately lost its effectiveness. At the time of his death, Detective Lanier stayed up watching the news until dawn, waiting for the official death announcement to finally bring the most horrendous chapter of his career to a close. More than 300 people in costumes gathered around the prison where he was being held, and when his death was announced, cries of "trick or treat" were heard and hundreds of candies were thrown into the air. I'm not joking, that actually happened. This case left a permanent stain on Halloween and forever changed the perception many parents have today about trick-or-treating, preferring to coordinate activities among their neighbors where each piece of candy is carefully monitored rather than simply going to random houses. Following the case, it became much more common for parents to check their children's candy before letting them eat it, and many hospitals even offer free candy analysis each year. While the threat of poison Halloween candy has largely remained an urban legend, O'Brien's actual murder provided a horrific and highly publicized case that cemented this specific fear in the public consciousness, and since then, the myth has only grown. As always, my friend, much love, and I hope you're alright. And also, I wish you a happy Halloween. If I was 18